July of 2018. The gravel lot behind Harrington Brothers' packing house smelled like burnt sugar under a hard Wisconsin sun. Dale Harrington slapped the disposal log against his palm and turned to his foreman. 43 bins. Write 'em all off. Same as last July. That's 30 tons, boss. You sure? Skins are cracked. Grocery won't touch 'em. Get the hauler out here by noon. 40 yards away, an 18-year-old black boy stood at the end of the row with a leather notebook, watching every bin roll toward the dump. He wrote one number down, then another. Then he closed the book and walked back to work without a word. By the following season, that boy's roadside stand would outsell the entire orchard. How? The apartment above the hardware store on Broadway had been home since the winter Malachi Freeman was 15. His mother, Yvette, had signed the lease on a Tuesday afternoon in early 2015, 3 weeks after a hydraulic lift at a repair shop in Milwaukee had come down on her husband, Marcus. She had loaded their belongings into a rented trailer within the month, told her son that Sauk County had a good hospital and a slower kind of quiet, and that she needed both. Malachi had not argued. He had been 15. He had watched her drive that trailer up Interstate 90 with the careful, deliberate focus of a woman doing the only thing she trusted her hands to do that week. And he had learned in the years that followed that grief in his mother's household was a private craft, kept out of the light, mentioned only when the shape of it was small enough to fit into ordinary conversation. By the summer of 2018, Malachi was 18 years old and home from his first year at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He wore glasses that his mother said made him look older than he was, and kept a leather-bound notebook in the inside pocket of the canvas jacket he had bought at a thrift store his senior year of high school. He was tall, thin in the way that boys who grow into their height in one summer are thin, and he had spent the previous 4 years learning something about Sauk County that had shaped him in ways he could not always name. He had been the only black student in the Sauk Prairie High class of 2017. He had learned early to read a room before he opened his mouth in it. He had learned that certain doors opened for him and certain doors did not, and that the difference was often not visible from the outside, and that a boy who wanted to walk through the doors that opened had to notice which doors those were and take them without commentary. He had started working the Dykstra orchard the summer he was 16, between his junior and senior years of high school. Raymond Dykstra ran 60 acres of peach and apple trees on the sandy slope south of town that his father, Emmett, had planted in 1961. Raymond was a careful, quiet man in his early 60s who kept his trees pruned to textbook specification, ran his irrigation on a timer, and had delivered his fruit to Harrington Brothers' packing house every summer for 30 years. He had hired Malachi through the high school work program without asking many questions, had given him a set of pruning shears and a row to walk on the first morning, and had noticed by the end of the first week that the boy did not need to be told the same thing twice. By the third summer, Raymond had put Malachi on the harvest crew and paid him $1.50 above what the other seasonal workers made, and had never mentioned to anyone, including Malachi, why he had done it. The system that ran the county's peach economy had the kind of stability that people mistook for weather. Raymond grew the fruit. Harrington Brothers graded it. The clean, cosmetically perfect peaches went in trucks to the Roundy's and Metcalf stores in Madison and Milwaukee. The bruised or misshapen fruit went to roadside markets at a reduced rate. And every July, when the heat came in early and the fruit on the lower slope cracked open on the tree before it could be picked at the right window, somewhere between 20 and 35 tons of perfectly edible peaches got written off as waste under the Cosmetic Standards clause in Raymond's contract. He received a damage payment that came out to roughly 40 cents on the dollar of what the fruit would have earned if it had gone to grocery. He accepted that payment the way he accepted late frost. He had been accepting it for 30 years. Malachi had watched those bins sit in the gravel lot behind the packing house every July since he was 16. In his second summer, he had begun to keep notes. During his freshman year at Madison, he had walked into the office of a food systems professor named Dr. Annika Sorensen and had asked her whether the numbers in her published case studies from Michigan and Vermont and Ontario were accurate, because he had run them against his own estimates for the Dykstra operation, and he did not trust his own math. Dr. Sorensen had looked at his notebook for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she had told him that his math was correct, and that she would like him to come back the following week with a proposal for an independent study. He had spent the spring semester of 2018 reading everything she gave him. Small orchard economics from the Finger Lakes, fermentation science out of Cornell, a master's thesis from Guelph on regulatory frameworks for licensed farm-scale cideries in the upper Midwest. He had built a spreadsheet with 3 separate scenarios and had run each one twice to be sure. By the time he came home to Baraboo in June, he had a plan on paper that was specific enough to be a decision. He waited until the second week of July. He wanted to see one heat event first. He wanted to be looking at real bins in a real gravel lot when he brought the proposal to Raymond, not a hypothetical from a case study. On a Tuesday morning in late July, the peaches on the lower slope split across 9 rows in a single afternoon. Raymond's foreman called it in as a loss. The bins came off the packing house dock the next morning. Malachi was standing 40 yards away at the edge of the lot with his notebook open and a pen in his hand when Dale Harrington walked out of the office in his Harrington Brothers polo shirt, took the disposal log from his foreman, and initialed 43 bins for the waste hauler without breaking stride. Malachi wrote the number down. Then he wrote the tonnage estimate next to it. Then he wrote, in his own private shorthand, the recovery figure that Dr. Sorensen's framework predicted for that volume of fruit if it were processed within 48 hours of harvest. The gap between those two numbers was somewhere between $51,000 and $62,000, depending on which assumptions he used. He had chosen to use the conservative assumptions. He closed the notebook. He walked back to the row of Braeburn apples he had been thinning, picked up his shears, and finished the morning shift without saying anything to anyone. That evening, he drove the borrowed pickup to the Dykstra house and knocked on the porch door. Raymond was already there, in a rocking chair with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in his hand, looking at nothing in particular the way a man looks at his own land after a long day. His wife, Carolyn, was in the kitchen behind the screen door, and Malachi could hear the soft clatter of dishes being put away. Raymond looked up when the boy came onto the porch and nodded once, which was the closest thing to a greeting he offered anyone. Malachi stayed standing. He said he had something he wanted to lay out, and he wanted to lay it out plainly, and he wanted Raymond to hear him through before saying anything. Raymond looked at him for a moment, then gestured at the empty rocker across from his own. Malachi sat. He opened the notebook. He walked Raymond through what he had seen that morning, the tonnage on the disposal log, the damage payment rate, the case study numbers from 3 other regional operations. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He talked the way an accountant talks when the accountant has done the work and does not need the room to like him, only to follow him. Then he told Raymond what he was proposing. He was not asking Raymond to change how the family business ran. He was not asking Raymond to renegotiate anything with Harrington. He wanted to lease the old equipment shed at the back of the property for a single dollar for the summer season. He wanted to buy the split fruit from 10 acres of the lower slope at the same rate Raymond would otherwise receive from the damage payment. He would carry all of the licensing costs. He would carry all of the equipment costs. He would carry all of the labor. If the operation failed, Raymond would be out nothing. If the operation succeeded, they could talk about the next season on different terms. Raymond did not answer right away. He set the coffee mug on the porch rail. He looked at Malachi for what felt to the boy like a long time, though it was probably not more than 15 seconds. "I need to think about it." He said it in the voice he used for anything he did not want to answer yet. Malachi nodded, closed the notebook, thanked him for hearing him out, and left. Raymond took 6 weeks. The math, Malachi understood later, was not what Raymond had been thinking about for 6 weeks. Raymond had been thinking about the coffee counter at the Sauk County Co-op on Route 12, where he stopped 3 mornings a week on his way in from the orchard, and where the equipment dealer Wes Crowley and the packing house owner Dale Harrington and half a dozen other growers held a rotating court over drip coffee and folded newspapers. Raymond had been thinking about what those men would say when the word got out that he was letting a college kid from the apartment above the hardware store in Baraboo run machinery on his back 40. He had been thinking, though he would never have put it in these words, about the specific weight of the fact that the college kid was black. He was not a bigoted man. He would have refused the accusation. He was a man, though, who had spent 61 years absorbing the ambient assumptions of Sauk County, Wisconsin, and he understood what those assumptions would do to a set of morning conversations at a co-op counter, and he understood that his reputation, which had taken 30 years to build, was a thing he did not know how to spend. It was Carolyn who broke it. She had said nothing while Malachi was on the porch. She had said nothing for the first 4 weeks after. On a Thursday evening in late August, over a plate of roasted chicken and green beans from her own garden, she looked at her husband across the kitchen table. That boy has worked 2 full seasons for us. Never late, never broke a piece of equipment, never gave me or you a minute of concern. Raymond did not look up from his plate. Whatever the men at the co-op are going to say, they're going to say it about something eventually. Might as well be something that makes this orchard some money. She set down her fork. You asked me 20 years ago about the Brayburn block. I said yes. You listened. I'm saying yes again. Then she stood up, cleared the dishes, and did not mention it for the rest of the evening. Raymond called Malachi the following Monday. He asked the boy to come by the porch that evening. Malachi drove out at 7. Raymond was in the same rocking chair. The coffee mug was fresh this time. He did not offer the boy a seat. I've thought about it. I'm going to agree. We're going to walk through what I'm agreeing to before we're done talking. He said the equipment shed was Malachi's for the season at $1. He said the split fruit from 10 acres of the lower slope was Malachi's at the damage payment rate. He said every license, every permit, every piece of equipment, every hired hand, every liability, and every dollar of loss would rest on the boy and not on the orchard. If it shows a loss at the end of the season, we're not doing it again. If it shows a profit, we sit at this porch in October and talk about next year. Then he stood up and put out his hand. Malachi took it. They shook once. Neither of them looked directly at the other's face while they were doing it. Malachi understood what that meant. Raymond understood what it meant. Neither of them said anything about it because there was no language in Sauk County that either of them had been given for the thing they had just done, and both of them were aware that speaking about it would only make the doing of it harder. Malachi drove back to Baraboo that night with the terms in his head and the arithmetic already running. The used 60-gallon press he had been tracking at a closed cidery in Door County. The fermentation tanks a home brewing supplier in Madison had listed at a price he could just afford. The cottage food processor license, the small winery permit, the lumber for the stand at the end of the Orchard Road. He knew what all of it would cost within about $200 either way. He knew that the number he was going to have to lay on the counter in front of him within the next 3 weeks came to $8,400. He knew that $8,400 was, to the exact dollar, the tuition savings account that his mother had opened for him the year they moved to Baraboo, and that he had built up through 3 summers at the Orchard and 2 work-study jobs at Madison, and that was supposed to cover the fall semester of his sophomore year. He sat in the truck outside the apartment for a long while with the engine off. Then he went upstairs, sat down at the kitchen table where his mother was working a crossword under the yellow light of the single overhead bulb, and told her what he was going to do. Yvette Freeman set down her pen when her son told her what he was going to do. She looked at him across the table for a long moment, the kind of moment that in her household did not need to be filled with anything. That number in your notebook, the 8,400, is it a real number or a hopeful one? It's real, Mama. I ran it 3 times. Dr. Sorensen looked at the framework. No errors. The case study data supports the recovery ratio on a conservative scale. Yvette listened. When he was done, she stood up, walked to the small metal box she kept on top of the refrigerator, took out the passbook for the tuition savings account, and slid it across the table to him. One semester of Madison is not the whole of your life. I put in 12-hour shifts at Sauk Prairie Healthcare for 3 years because I wanted you to have room to build something. This is room. If you lose it, we'll find another way in the spring." Then she turned back to the crossword and did not speak of it again that night. He spent the next 3 weeks in the equipment shed at the back of the Dykstra property. The building had been a machinery bay in Emmett Dykstra's day, and Raymond had used it for cold storage of pruning tools for the better part of 2 decades. The concrete floor sloped half an inch across its length, which Malachi had to correct before he could set the press. He rebuilt a section of the north wall where a raccoon had come through the previous winter. He ran new electrical to accommodate the pump. He drove up to Door County on a Saturday to load the 60-gallon press into the borrowed pickup, and he drove down to Madison the following Tuesday to pick up the 2 fermentation tanks from the home brewing supplier, and he built the cold storage room in the back corner of the shed himself, out of insulated panels he had found on a lumberyard clearance rack and a used compressor from a restaurant supply auction in Portage. He did the licensing paperwork at the county office in 3 separate trips, sitting on the same wooden bench each time, filling out the same triplicate forms, while a clerk who did not remember him between visits watched him from behind a plexiglass window. He built the stand at the end of the Orchard Road out of lumber Raymond had let him take from the barn. He painted the sign on a Saturday afternoon in early July on a piece of pine board he had sanded smooth the night before, with a small tin of exterior enamel he had bought at Ace Hardware in Baraboo. He wrote the name he had chosen for the operation in block letters, the way he had learned to do drafting labels in a high school shop class. Freeman Cider Works. He set the sign on 2 posts he had sunk in concrete the day before, and he stood back and looked at it for a moment before he went inside to run one last check on the equipment. The first pressing came the following Thursday. A rain had come through the county on the Wednesday night after a 2-week dry stretch, and the peaches on the sandy lower rows had cracked open across the middle of the afternoon. Malachi harvested 400 pounds of split fruit between 5 and 8 o'clock that evening, pressed through the night, and had the first juice in bottles by 9 the next morning. He opened the stand at 10. He sold out at 1 in the afternoon. The moment he remembered from that first day was not the last bottle going into the paper sack of the last customer. It was earlier, closer to noon, when a woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat had pulled her car onto the gravel shoulder in front of the stand and had gotten out to look at the chalkboard menu. Behind her, another car had slowed on the county road, driven by 2 men in their 50s in a mud-splattered pickup. The pickup had rolled at a walking pace past the stand while both men looked at Malachi, at the sign, at the stand. Then the driver had touched the accelerator and the truck had continued down the road. Neither man had stopped. Neither man had waved. The woman had not seemed to notice. "Where are you from, sweetheart?" "Baraboo, ma'am." She smiled and picked up a bottle of the fresh juice. As she was handing him the $10 bill for it, "You're a nice young man. I hope your little stand does well. Where did you get the peaches, son?" "From the Dykstra orchard, ma'am." "Oh, what a lucky boy you are that Raymond lets you do this." "Thank you, ma'am." He put the bottle in a paper sack. He watched her drive away. Then he wrote the interaction down in his notebook, without commentary, because he had learned that writing things down was how he kept them from taking up more space in his head than they deserved. By the end of August, he had run 11 batches through the shed, processed just over 4,200 pounds of split fruit from the 10 acres Raymond had committed to him, and cleared $14,300 in gross revenue. His costs, including the amortized equipment, the licensing fees, the packaging, and the raw fruit at the damage payment rate he had paid Raymond, came to $6,800. His net for the season was $7,500 from fruit that would have earned Raymond $840 under the Harrington contract. He wrote out the accounting on a single sheet of legal paper and drove it out to the porch on a Sunday evening in early September. Raymond read the sheet. He set it down on the porch rail. He looked at Malachi. "It's not bad." Then, "I need to think about next year." and Malachi understood that this was as close to an endorsement as a first season was going to earn. In the second week of October, on a Tuesday morning, Malachi drove to the Sauk County Co-op on Route 12. He had thought about the trip for 3 days before he made it. He had not told his mother he was going. He had not told Raymond. He had chosen the time carefully, 10:30 in the morning, after the early crowd of dairy operators and equipment mechanics had thinned out and before the lunch crowd came in. He had put on a collared shirt. He had put the notebook in the inside pocket of the canvas jacket. He had walked in through the front door of the co-op as if he had been walking in through that door his whole life, and he had crossed the polished concrete floor to the coffee counter at the back of the store where 4 men were sitting on stools. Dale Harrington was on the far right, in his Harrington Brothers polo shirt, with a coffee mug and a folded newspaper and a small stack of contract paperwork in a manila folder. To his left was Wes Crowley, the equipment dealer, in a gray canvas work jacket with his company's logo stitched over the breast pocket. Next to Wes was Bud Sievert, a grower from the east side of the county who had a smaller orchard operation and who had been at the co-op counter on and off for as long as anyone could remember. The counter manager, whose name Malachi had never learned, was leaning on the far side of the counter with a rag in his hand. All 4 of them were white. All 4 of them looked up when Malachi walked to the counter, and the room went into the particular kind of quiet that a room goes into when something unexpected but not alarming has entered it. Not hostility. Notice. "Morning, Mr. Harrington. My name's Malachi Freeman. I did a project this past summer I thought you might want to hear about. If the counter can spare 5 minutes, I'd like to walk you through the numbers." Wes Crowley made a small sound that was not exactly a laugh, more a puff of air out of the nose, and looked at Dale. Dale, who was a courteous man in the way that men of a certain generation in Sauk County were courteous, gestured at the empty stool at the near end of the counter. "You're welcome to sit, son." Malachi did not sit. He set the notebook on the counter. He walked the 4 men through the summer, the tonnage he had processed, the revenue he had cleared, the gap between what he had recovered from a fixed volume of split fruit and what the same volume had returned to Raymond under the standard damage payment schedule. He kept his voice level and his sentences short, the way he had learned to keep them in Dr. Sorensen's office when he was presenting numbers he wanted the numbers themselves to carry. The packing house's waste stream is a redirectable resource. It could support small processing partnerships across the county. I wanted you to know I'm interested in that conversation whenever you're ready to have it, Mr. Harrington. Dale listened all the way through. He did not interrupt. When Malachi finished, Dale picked up his coffee mug, took a slow drink from it, and set it back down on the counter. Then he did something Malachi would remember for the rest of his life. He smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind of smile a man learned to wear over the course of 30 years of politely declining things he had no intention of doing, and it had the specific quality of feeling like courtesy from a certain distance, and like something else when you were standing directly in front of it. "Well, I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit, son, but the waste stream question is more complicated than it looks from the outside. The liability exposure for a packing house partnering with small processors, that's a significant undertaking. And the cosmetic standards? Grocery chains set those, not Harrington Brothers. Nothing to be done about the grading requirements at the source." Wes Crowley laughed. It was not a mean laugh. It was worse than a mean laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had heard something impractical from a person he had already decided did not need to be engaged with, and who was performing his own patience for the benefit of the counter. "Peach wine's a nice hobby, son." The word son sat in the air of the co-op for a beat. It carried, in that particular room and from that particular mouth, the shape of a hand on a shoulder that Malachi had felt several times in his life without anyone ever having actually touched him. He did not react to it. He had trained himself not to react to it. Bud Sievert on Wes's left was looking down at his coffee cup with the deliberate stillness of a man who had decided the safest thing he could do was not participate. Malachi turned back to Dale. "Mr. Harrington, the liability exposure from a licensed small winery permit under the Wisconsin Cottage Processor Framework is fully covered under existing statute. I know because I hold the permit. The framework is public. I'm happy to send you a copy if it would be useful. And I understand if the packing house isn't in a position to have that conversation right now. He closed the notebook. I hope you'll think about it. He nodded to the counter manager, walked back across the polished concrete floor, and pushed the front door open into the parking lot. He sat in the pickup truck for a full minute before he turned the key. He did not cry. He did not swear. He did not in any way visible from outside the truck react at all. What he did was think. He thought about the smile. He thought about the laugh. He thought about the word son, and about the particular way Bud Sievert had not looked up from his coffee. He thought about the case study on his desk at home from a cidery in Ontario that had grown to a distribution footprint of 19 states out of a single farm shed over the course of 4 years. And he understood, sitting there with his hands on the steering wheel and the notebook on the passenger seat next to him, that he had been thinking about the wrong problem for the last 4 months. He had been thinking of Dale Harrington as an audience he needed to persuade. He was not going to persuade Dale Harrington. Dale Harrington was not going to be persuaded by a black boy at a co-op counter with a notebook and a set of numbers. Dale Harrington was going to be moved, if he was going to be moved at all, by a set of numbers so large and so plainly documented that no room in Sauk County could look at them and continue to describe what he was doing as a hobby. That was going to be the work. That was going to be the whole of the work. He turned the key. He drove back to Baraboo. He did not tell his mother where he had been. Raymond gave him 30 acres for the summer of 2019. The 30 acres were the sandy lower slope. It was the ground where the fruit split hardest, where the July heat hit soonest, where the percentage of cosmetic rejects in a normal year ran 3 times what it did on the upper terraces. Raymond had thought about which ground to offer for close to a month before he made the offer, and Malachi understood when he heard which block Raymond was giving him that the choice was not accidental. Raymond was not doing a favor. Raymond was setting a test. If the operation could carry the roughest ground in the orchard, it could carry anything. If it could not, Raymond would have his answer, and he would have made his decision on a block he would not have expected to earn much from anyway. Malachi took the terms. He drove back to Baraboo that night and started running the winter numbers. The scale-up came to nearly 4 times what he had run in the first season. He needed a 200-gallon press to handle the volume, which meant a trip to a cidery outside of Grand Rapids that was scaling up to a larger production line and had listed their old equipment for sale in a trade paper Dr. Sorensen had put him on to. He needed 2 additional fermentation tanks. He needed to expand the cold storage room. He needed the farm winery license, which was a step up from the small winery permit, and which would let him sell into licensed retailers and farmers markets outside of the direct farm stand channel. He needed properly designed labels for the bottles, printed on real label stock, in a format that a wine shop buyer would take seriously. He did not have the money for any of it. He had cleared $7,500 in the first season. He had put $6,000 of that back into the tuition account he had drawn from in August, and he had used the rest to cover the fall semester books and living expenses in Madison. The winter scale-up needed something on the order of $12,000 in additional capital, and he was going into it with a savings balance of $280 and no collateral. Dr. Sorensen wrote him a letter. It ran 2 pages, single-spaced, on university letterhead, and it laid out what he had done in the first season with the specificity of a peer-reviewed report. She sent it under her signature to the Rural Development Startup Fund at the University of Wisconsin, which extended small seed loans to student-run agricultural enterprises in the state at below-market rates. The fund approved him for $9,000 in early February on a 5-year note. His mother covered the rest. She came to him on a Thursday evening at the end of February, in the kitchen of the apartment above the hardware store, and she handed him a cashier's check for $3,000. He looked at the check. He looked at her. He knew where the $3,000 had come from because he knew every account in the household, and he knew what she had been saving toward. She had been saving toward a used car to replace the sedan she had been driving since the year they moved to Baraboo, which was starting to burn oil, and which the mechanic at the shop next to the co-op had told her was on borrowed time. She had been talking about the used car for 8 months. She was not talking about it now. "I believe in you, baby. I'm not making you promise to pay me back. If I make you promise that, you'll spend the next 3 years working yourself into an early grave trying to keep it. I want you to build the thing, not chase the debt. Take the check to Michigan on Saturday. Bring me back a full report next week." Then she went back to her crossword. Malachi put the check in his wallet. He drove to Grand Rapids on Saturday. He brought back the press. He hired 2 seasonal workers for the summer. He put a hand-lettered notice up at the Baraboo YMCA and at the Sauk Prairie High job board in mid-May, and he interviewed 4 applicants over 2 afternoons in the shed. He hired a young man named Jesse, who had graduated from the same high school Malachi had graduated from 2 years earlier, and who had spent the previous summer stocking shelves at the co-op, and another young man named Tyler, who had grown up on a dairy operation on the east side of the county, and who had a working knowledge of pumps and belt-driven machinery. Both of them were white. Both of them were local. Both of them, in the first week of the season, had to figure out something about the arrangement that no one in Sauk County had given them a script for, which was that the person paying them, the person telling them how to run the press, the person signing their weekly checks, was Malachi. Tyler called his mother on the morning of the first day, from the parking area at the end of the Orchard Road, before he had gotten out of his truck. Malachi did not hear the conversation. He learned about it later from Jesse, who told him about it one afternoon in mid-July while they were cleaning the press together. Tyler had told his mother that he was not sure whether the arrangement was going to work out. His mother had told him that a paycheck was a paycheck, that the Freeman boy was a college kid from Madison, and by all accounts a serious person, and that Tyler was going to walk into the shed that morning like a professional and see what the summer looked like. Tyler had walked into the shed. He had shown up every day of the season after that, on time, and by the end of the summer he was running the second fermentation cycle without needing to be checked on. Malachi never mentioned the phone call. Tyler never mentioned it either. The first wholesale order came in the middle of June. A woman named Diane Kelso, who ran a wine and specialty foods shop on Williamson Street in Madison, had received a bottle of Malachi's cider from a customer who had picked one up at the farm stand the summer before, had tasted it in her back office, and had called the number on the label the following Monday morning. Malachi took the call, standing in the middle of the shed, next to the 200-gallon press he had just finished cleaning. "Do you have wholesale distribution set up?" "I have a farm winery license. I can sell direct to licensed retailers under Wisconsin statute." "Case price?" he told her. "Can you deliver 12 cases by the last Friday of June?" "Yes, ma'am, I can. I'll send the paperwork this afternoon. Thank you." The line went dead. Malachi stood in the middle of the shed with the phone in his hand for a long moment. His hands were shaking. He set the phone down on the workbench. He wiped his palms on his jeans. He went back to cleaning the press. The break event came on the 9th of July. 3 days of steady rain, ending on the Monday evening, had followed 2 full weeks of dry heat, and the peaches on the sandy lower slope split across 12 rows in a single afternoon. Raymond's foreman called it in as a total loss on the block by 5 o'clock in the evening. Malachi was in the shed when the foreman drove down the Orchard Road to report to Raymond at the house, and Raymond called the shed within 20 minutes. "The lower slope's gone. 12 rows. Do what you need to do." Malachi was in the orchard with Jesse and Tyler within the hour, with every bin the operation owned and both of the pickup trucks he had access to. They harvested through the evening. They kept harvesting after the sun went down, working under the headlights of the trucks and by the light of 2 battery-powered work lamps that Malachi had bought earlier in the season for exactly this kind of contingency. By 11 o'clock that night, they had 4,800 pounds of split peaches loaded into bins in the shed, and Malachi had until the following Wednesday evening to run all of them through the press before the flesh began to degrade past the point where it would ferment cleanly. He started the first pressing at midnight. Jesse went home at 2 in the morning to sleep for 4 hours and came back at 6. Tyler stayed until 3, went home, came back at 7. Malachi did not go home. He ran the press without stopping. He filled the first fermentation tank by 6 in the morning, the second by 11, the third by 3 in the afternoon, and the fourth by 7 that evening. Then he cleaned the press, changed the pump seals, and started a second run cycle at 9 at night. On the Saturday morning of that week, he loaded the pickup at 4 in the morning with the first 8 cases of the season's release for the Baraboo Farmers Market and drove into town. His route took him past the gravel lot behind Harrington Brothers' packing house. 31 tons of split peaches from other growers were sitting in the lot in the pale gray light before sunrise, in bins stacked 4 high, waiting for the waste hauler. He slowed the truck as he drove past. He did not stop. He wrote the number down in the notebook at the next red light. Then he drove on to the market. By Sunday night, he had been awake for close to 70 hours, with a total of about 6 hours of sleep in shifts of 30 and 40 minutes on a folding cot he had set up in the office corner of the shed. He was sitting on the concrete step outside the cold storage room at 3 in the morning, with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in his hand, when his phone lit up on the step next to him. It was a text from his mother. It said only, "Come home for breakfast." He looked at the phone for a while. He did not answer. He set the coffee mug down on the concrete. He stood up. He went back into the shed and started the third press cycle of the run. Remember, he closed the stand on the 4th of October. It was a Friday, cool for early autumn, with the maples along the county road already going red at the tips. He took down the chalkboard menu, wrapped the last case of unsold cider in a wool blanket for the drive to the cold storage room, and locked the stand from the outside for the first time since the season had opened in late June. Then he went back to the shed and spent the following week doing the accounting. He did it the way his mother had taught him to do difficult things, which was to do them all the way through in a single sitting so that the fact of them could not stretch itself across days. He sat at the workbench with the leather-bound notebook, 3 separate ledger sheets, the invoice folder from Diane Kelso's shop on Williamson Street, and from the 2 other retailers who had picked up the product over the summer, the receipts from the farmer's market booth in Baraboo, and a hand calculator he had used since his junior year of high school. He worked from 7 in the morning until nearly 9 at night. When he was finished, he had a single sheet of legal paper in front of him with the season's final numbers written down the left margin in his own careful hand. He had processed 44,200 pounds of split and cull fruit from the 30-acre lower slope, which came to about 87% of the cosmetic reject volume the block had generated over the course of the season. His gross revenue was $111,400. His total costs came to $41,200. His net operating income for the season was $70,200. The damage payment Raymond would have received from Harrington Brothers for the same volume of split fruit under the standard contract came to $9,300. He looked at the sheet for a long time. Then he wrote the 2 numbers side by side at the top of the page. 70,200 and 9,300, and drew a single horizontal line under both of them. That was the answer. That was the whole of it. A roadside cider stand run by an 18-year-old black kid out of a leased equipment shed on the sandiest 30 acres of the Dykstra Orchard had, in a single season, cleared more than 7 times what the same fruit would have returned to the family under the contract that had been running that ground for 30 years. He drove to the porch on a Tuesday evening in the second week of October with the accounting sheet folded once in his jacket pocket and a check for the shed lease and the raw fruit sitting on the passenger seat next to him in a plain white envelope. Raymond was in the rocking chair. The air off the orchard smelled like fallen apples. Carolyn was in the kitchen behind the screen door with the radio on low, playing something Malachi did not recognize. Malachi did not sit. He handed Raymond the folded sheet. He handed him the envelope. The accounting and the payment. I'd like you to read the sheet before you open the envelope. Raymond took the sheet. He held it under the porch light. He read it once. He read it again. He set it on the rail next to the coffee mug he had been holding when Malachi walked up. He looked at the boy. 70,000. Yes, sir. Off the lower slope. Yes, sir. Raymond picked up the envelope. He weighed it in his hand for a moment. Then he set it down on the sheet of legal paper without opening it and pushed both of them back across the porch rail toward Malachi. You hang on to that. Next year, we'll sit here in October and talk about a profit share. Malachi looked at him. He picked up the envelope and the sheet. He put them back in his jacket pocket. He did not say thank you because he understood, in the way he had come to understand a lot of things about Raymond over the last 2 years, that thanks would have embarrassed both of them. He nodded once. Raymond nodded back. Malachi went down the porch steps and drove home. He was invited to present at the Wisconsin Orchard Growers Association annual meeting in February. The invitation had come from a program committee member who had heard about the operation from Dr. Sorensen at a food systems symposium in Milwaukee in November. It had come as a plain letter in a plain envelope on association letterhead, addressed to Mr. Malachi Freeman, Freeman Cider Works, Baraboo, Wisconsin. He had shown the letter to his mother that evening. Yvette had read it twice, in the same way she read anything that mattered. You should say yes, baby. He had said yes. The meeting was held at the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, in a windowless conference room on the second floor with rows of folding chairs and a small carpeted stage at the front. Malachi arrived an hour before his session. He set up his laptop, tested the projector, checked the wireless clicker twice, and then stood at the back of the room and watched the audience come in. 63 growers took their seats over the course of the following 20 minutes. Most of them were men. All of them, so far as he could see from the back of the room, were white. He was the only person on the printed program under the age of 40. He was, so far as he could tell, the only black person in the building outside of the housekeeping staff. He did not mention any of that when he walked to the podium. He walked the room through 2 seasons of data in plain language, the same way he had walked Raymond through the accounting on the porch, the same way he had walked the 4 men at the co-op counter through the first season numbers a year and a half earlier. He put up the tonnage figures. He put up the recovery ratios. He put up the comparison between the standard damage payment schedule and the per-unit margins on the processed product. He did not editorialize. He did not tell them what to do with what he was showing them. He put the numbers on the screen and let the numbers speak. The room was quiet in a specific way while he spoke. It was not the quiet of disinterest. It was the quiet of 63 orchard operators doing math in their heads and not liking where the math was coming out. He watched their faces from the podium as he moved through the slides. Some of them were writing in small notebooks. Some of them were staring at the screen. Some of them were looking at their hands. Dale Harrington was in the 3rd row. Malachi had not known Dale would be there until he walked to the podium and looked out at the audience. Dale had not registered for the program in advance. He had come in during the introductions and taken a seat at the aisle end of the 3rd row without speaking to anyone. He was wearing the same Harrington Brothers polo shirt he wore every day. He listened all the way through the presentation. When Malachi put up the slide comparing the $9,300 damage payment to the $70,200 net operating income, Dale looked down at his hands and kept them there for the length of the next 3 slides. After the session, there was a reception in the hallway outside the conference room, with a coffee urn on a folding table and a plate of pastries that had been sitting out too long. Malachi stood near the coffee urn with Raymond, who had driven down for the day and who was standing about 2 feet behind and to his left, with his hands in the pockets of his good jacket and an expression on his face that was somewhere between quiet pride and a kind of measured watchfulness Malachi did not have a word for. 3 orchard operators came over within the first 10 minutes to ask questions about licensing and equipment and market access. Malachi answered all of them from memory. Dale Harrington came over about 20 minutes into the reception. He waited until the last of the other operators had drifted away. He was holding a paper cup of coffee he had not drunk. Malachi watched him cross the hallway and did not move. Malachi. Even Mr. Harrington. Dale looked at the paper cup in his hand. I have some questions about the processing model. I'm happy to answer questions, though I believe your exact words at the co-op counter were that the liability exposure was more complicated than it looked from the outside. Dale looked at the coffee cup. That's fair. I was wrong about that. The numbers are hard to argue with. I'm sorry it's taken me this long. Malachi looked at him for what was probably 5 seconds and felt like considerably longer. The lesson isn't that cider is better than a packing house contract, Mr. Harrington. The lesson is, any operation that treats its own product as waste without asking whether it could be something else is leaving money on the ground every year. And the ground doesn't care how long you've been farming it, or who was the one who stopped to look at it. I'll send you the framework. He said it the way a person says something that is both the end of one conversation and the opening of another. Raymond stood 2 feet behind Malachi's left shoulder and did not say anything. But he was looking at Dale Harrington with the level, patient expression of a man who had been quiet for a very long time, and who was, for the first time in the 22 years he had been doing business with Harrington Brothers, standing on the side of the 18-year-old black kid rather than the side of his contemporary at the coffee counter. By the spring of 2021, Freeman's Cider Works was handling the full cosmetic reject stream from all 60 acres of the Dykstra orchard under a formal profit share agreement Malachi and Raymond had signed on the porch the previous October. The equipment shed had been expanded twice. The cold storage room now held 480 cases. The product was in 11 retail locations across Wisconsin. The per-acre revenue from the orchard had increased by 231% over the 2017 baseline. Raymond had paid off the operating debt he had carried since a hail loss in 2015. His retirement was, for the first time in his adult life, no longer a matter of open worry. Dale Harrington restructured the Harrington Brothers waste stream policy in the same year. He did it quietly. He did not put out a press release. He signed formal supply agreements with 3 small processing operations in the county to redirect cosmetic reject fruit that had previously gone to the waste hauler, and one of those 3 agreements was with Freeman's Cider Works. Malachi negotiated the terms across a conference table in the Harrington Brothers office in June of that year, with Dale on the other side of the table and his contracts manager next to him. Neither of them mentioned the co-op counter. Neither of them needed to. Wes Crowley walked up to the stand in July of 2021 on a Saturday afternoon and bought 2 bottles of the hard cider. He did not mention the conversation from 3 years earlier. He paid in cash. "Thank you for stopping by." Wes drove away. Bud Sievert came to the shed in April of 2022. He had an apple operation in the next county over, and he had a persistent split fruit problem on his own lower rows. And he had been thinking, he said, about whether the numbers could work for him at his scale. "I've been thinking about this for a while, Malachi. Would you be willing to consult?" I would. He charged him a consulting fee that was fair. He spent 2 full days walking Bud's operation and writing a framework document Bud could take to his county extension office. Neither of them mentioned the co-op counter. That was over now, or as close to over as anything in Sauk County ever got. In the spring of 2023, Malachi bought 40 acres of his own. The land was a sandy sloped parcel on the south side of the county, on the same kind of ground the extension office had been telling growers for 2 generations was not worth planting peaches on. The county agricultural agent, when Malachi told him what he was going to put in the ground, had looked at him across the desk. "You sure about this?" "Yes, sir." "You're sure?" "Yes, sir." He had planted the first 16 rows in April. Yvette had given her notice at the hospital in June, and had moved into the front office of Freeman's Cider Works to run the wholesale accounts and the direct ship logistics. She had traded in the sedan that had been on borrowed time since the spring of 2019 for a used compact she had picked out herself. Malachi sat on the porch with Raymond one evening in early August of that year, after dinner at the Dykstra house that Carolyn had insisted on cooking. The orchard was quiet. The lower slope was starting to color up for the late-season harvest. Raymond looked out across the rows of trees his own father had planted the year Kennedy took office. My father wouldn't have understood what you just did with that ground, but he would have respected it. Malachi did not answer for a moment. He looked out at the orchard with the older man. Thank you, Raymond. Raymond nodded once, and they sat on the porch until it was fully dark. His youngest daughter came to the Freeman Cider Works office on a Tuesday afternoon in the March of 2024. Her name was Petra. She was 18 years old, a senior at Sauk Prairie High, and she had a leather-bound notebook of her own that she set on Malachi's desk without any preamble. I've been reading about industrial hemp as a cover crop in mixed orchard systems, and the state framework for licensed cultivation. I ran the numbers on the 8-acre parcel Daddy's been renting out. The rate's well below what a diversified system would return on the same ground. I already called the Department of Agriculture about the licensing process. I wanted to know what you thought. Malachi looked at her. He looked at the notebook. He thought about a kitchen table in Baraboo 6 years earlier and a passbook slid across it under a single yellow bulb. He thought about a porch in the late summer of 2018 and a handshake neither party had known how to talk about. He thought about the door Raymond had reluctantly opened and about where he would have been standing in the spring of 2024 if that door had stayed closed. Then he smiled at her. Show me your numbers, Petra. Let's figure out what you need. 30 tons of split peaches had sat in a gravel lot in Sauk County every July for 22 years. The packing house had written them off. The whole county had walked past them without seeing anything. And then one summer, a boy that no one in Sauk County had thought had the standing to look at them, looked at them. And the ground had been telling the same story all along. It had only been waiting for someone that Sauk County had not gotten around to teaching that the thing was impossible. The value of a product is not decided by what it looks like. It is decided by who takes the time to see it. But the story that unfolded on the Dykstra orchard between the summer of 2018 and the spring of 2024 said something a little further than that. Sometimes the only person who is willing to see a thing clearly is the person the system has not yet made comfortable inside it. An 18-year-old with nothing to lose and no 30 years of habit to protect saw what an entire industry had spent 2 decades looking past. Innovation does not usually come from the people who are at home in a room. It comes from the people the room has not yet made a seat for.